She's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day.
That is Hugo Vickers speaking, not a random internet commentator, not an anonymous social media account chasing clicks. Hugo Vickers, a royal historian with 4 decades spent documenting the monarchy, a man trusted inside royal circles for years, the captain of the lay stewards at St. George's Chapel, and someone who physically helped carry Queen Elizabeth II's coffin during one of the most historic royal ceremonies in modern history. And now, after years of speculation surrounding the Archie birth timeline, he has publicly said something many people never expected to hear from an establishment figure.
So she had to accept, that the things would be happening on a national level. And that's what the royal family has to accept as well. And most of them understand that. And so you make announcements. You tell people, the child's going to be born. You tell it where it's going to be born. You tell it when it was born. You show the child at a certain point. You tell us who the godparents are going to be. And we all enjoy this. And we're very much then, we, the general public, very much on the side of the person doing that and sort of enjoying it because they are a family at the centre of the nation. And that's all part of it. So to deny us that, I think, was sort of, kicking in causing trouble and showing she was going to do it her way. And that's when things began to go wrong.
He said the story does not make sense to him. That is why this moment matters so much. Because for years, critics raising questions about the timeline were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, online agitators, or fringe commentators. Lady Colin Campbell has openly questioned aspects of the timeline since 2020. But her critics often brushed her aside as controversial or unreliable. Now suddenly, a respected royal biographer associated directly with establishment institutions is expressing similar confusion publicly. And that changes the atmosphere around the discussion immediately.
Meghan at the Albert Hall. How many weeks pregnant was she supposed to be? Was it about 8 weeks? And she looks as if she's at least 5 months pregnant.
If you enjoy deep royal analysis and the hidden institutional tensions unfolding quietly behind public headlines, make sure to subscribe, because this story becomes far more complicated once you examine exactly what Hugo Vickers said, and what he noticeably avoided saying outright. The conversation happened during an appearance on Dan Wootton's channel, where Vickers was primarily promoting his new biography, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, published earlier this year. The book itself is already attracting major attention across Britain and the Commonwealth. Reviews praised Vickers' decades of first-hand royal knowledge, and the Financial Times even described him as perhaps the most knowledgeable royal biographer alive. So when someone with that level of institutional credibility suddenly comments on the Sussexes, people notice. And according to viewers watching the interview, there was a clear moment where the conversation shifted away from royal history and directly toward Meghan and Harry.
And why it was interesting to me is because, Hugo Vickers is a cautious guy. He's a guy who has very close connections to the royal family. And a lot of what he says, you have to read between the lines.
That is when Vickers described the Archie birth timeline as crazy business. He reportedly questioned how the publicly presented timeline appeared to show Meghan giving birth and then seemingly entering labor later the same day. He also pointed to the unusual secrecy surrounding the event.
Do you remember Meghan actually refused to use the hospital that was usually used by royals and refused to use all of the normal medical staff? And there was all of the weirdness over the timing of the birth of Archie.
Specifically mentioning that Archie's obstetrician was never publicly identified and that the godparents were also never formally revealed. Now, importantly, Vickers did not make direct accusations. That distinction matters. Instead, he focused repeatedly on the inconsistencies and secrecy surrounding the situation, arguing those elements simply did not add up in his mind compared to normal royal procedure. And this is where things become especially interesting, because according to reports, these are not brand new comments. Vickers apparently made similar observations during an interview with The Sun back in late 2024, but almost nobody paid attention at the time. The remarks circulated briefly online and then disappeared beneath the constant flood of royal headlines. But now, the timing feels very different, because today, public skepticism surrounding Harry and Meghan has grown dramatically compared to where it was even a few years ago. And once a respected establishment historian starts openly expressing doubts that critics have been repeating for years, the conversation suddenly becomes much harder for audiences to dismiss outright. Dan Wootton was not commenting on this story from a distance. In 2019, he was still at The Sun, actively covering the royal beat, while the Archie birth announcement unfolded in real time. And during his recent discussion with Hugo Vickers, Wootton made a point that immediately caught viewers' attention. He said Vickers never used the word fraud, but according to Wootton, he did not need to, because the real issue, in their view, is not one dramatic accusation. It is the documentary trail, or more specifically, the unusual gaps inside it. And this is where the story moves away from internet speculation and back toward royal procedure itself. Outside Buckingham Palace, the famous easel placed at the forecourt railings is not simply ceremonial decoration. Historically, it serves as the official public instrument confirming a royal birth. A framed notice is displayed, traditionally signed by the attending physician, photographed by the royal rota, and preserved as part of the monarchy's institutional record. That process exists for a reason. Its origins stretch all the way back to the 1688 warming pan scandal, when suspicions surrounding the birth of James Francis Edward Stuart triggered constitutional panic and demands for verification procedures around royal heirs. Over time, the process evolved, and by the modern era, the attending physician's signed confirmation became central to the tradition. For Prince George's birth in 2013, the easel listed 3 doctors, Sir Marcus Setchell, Alan Farthing, and Guy Thorpe Beeston. Real names, real medical professionals, publicly confirmed by the palace before the birth itself. The same pattern repeated for Princess Charlotte in 2015 and Prince Louis in 2018. The doctors' identities were known in advance. Photographers were waiting outside the Lindo wing before labor even began. The institution wanted transparency because the convention itself depended on public trust. Then came Archie's birth announcement on May 6, 2019. Time of birth listed, weight listed, hospital listed, doctor's name blank. That blank space is the detail commentators like Vickers and Wootton keep circling back to repeatedly. Now, importantly, hospitals are under no obligation to release private medical information publicly. The Portland Hospital later cited patient confidentiality, which is entirely standard medical practice. But critics argue that royal birth announcements traditionally function differently because they operate not only as personal family news, but also as constitutional documentation tied historically to succession legitimacy. And according to commentators questioning the timeline, every public detail surrounding Archie's birth ultimately came from only 2 voices, Harry and Meghan themselves. No named doctor publicly attached to the easel, no identified medical witness on the official notice, no public confirmation from attending staff. For many people, that may mean nothing at all, but for critics like Hugo Vickers, the unusual departure from long-established royal protocol remains difficult to reconcile, especially when compared side by side with every recent royal birth that came before it. And according to observers, that is exactly why the conversation surrounding this issue refuses to disappear quietly. Lady Colin Campbell has been raising questions about Archie's birth timeline for years. Not weeks, not months, years. Since 2020, she has discussed the issue repeatedly across hundreds of hours of long-form commentary from Castle Goring, surrounded by the royal biographies and aristocratic histories that built her public identity over decades. Her book Meghan and Harry. The Real Story intensified those discussions even further after its expanded release in 2022, and whether people agreed with her or not, one fact became impossible to deny. She became the single most recognizable public figure consistently questioning the Sussex timeline, and she paid a price for it. Critics dismissed her constantly. Mainstream commentary often framed her as sensational, controversial, or unreliable. For years, the easiest way to shut down the conversation was simple. That's just Lady C again. But according to observers following the latest developments, That defense suddenly became much harder to use after Hugo Vickers spoke publicly, because now the issue is no longer simply about what Lady Colin Campbell believes. It is about what Hugo Vickers said on camera while promoting a major royal biography sitting inside the Sunday Times top 10. And that distinction changes the atmosphere around the debate completely. This is not an outsider attacking the institution. This is someone deeply associated with royal tradition itself, a historian trusted enough to serve inside St. George's Chapel during major royal ceremonies, including events connected directly to Queen Elizabeth II. And then came the moment that really caught viewers' attention. The day after Vickers appeared on Dan Wootton's program, Lady Colin Campbell herself appeared on the same channel. Wootton played her Vickers comments about the timeline inconsistencies, and according to many viewers, something about her reaction felt different. She slowed down. There was almost a sense of recognition in the moment, as though she understood immediately that this was no longer just her argument anymore. Vickers represented something she never fully could, institutional legitimacy, and according to commentators, Lady C seemed acutely aware of that distinction. Vickers still holds respected establishment positions. Lady C has spent decades operating more independently and controversially outside those structures. Yet after 6 years of separate commentary, they had arrived publicly at almost the exact same conclusion. The timeline surrounding Archie's birth does not make sense to them. Now importantly, Vickers remained careful with his wording. He questioned the inconsistencies. He pointed to secrecy. He challenged the chronology. But he stopped short of making direct allegations. Lady Colin Campbell did not. During the interview, she escalated the language dramatically, describing the situation as a scandal she believed belonged alongside major royal controversies of the past. Vickers would not go that far publicly, but according to observers, both ultimately arrived at the same core point. They believe serious questions remain unanswered, and this is where the wider significance of Vickers' new book enters the picture. Queen Elizabeth II. A Personal History is not some fringe publication floating around obscure internet forums. It is a major mainstream royal biography published by Hodder, serialized in the Daily Mail, praised by the Telegraph, and heavily featured by publications like Hello Magazine. That matters because establishment media outlets are now openly discussing Sussex-related tension surrounding the late Queen in ways that would have seemed almost untouchable only a few years ago. And according to many royal watchers, that shift may be the biggest story of all, and this is the detail that makes the entire conversation feel dramatically different now. The comments are no longer circulating only through controversial YouTube channels or fringe royal gossip spaces. They are now connected to mainstream establishment publishing. Hello Magazine covered the book extensively, not a tabloid screaming from the checkout aisle, but one of Britain's most royal-friendly mainstream publications, the kind of outlet that traditionally protects institutional narratives rather than destabilizes them. That shift matters enormously, because inside Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, Hugo Vickers reportedly writes that the distress caused to the late Queen by Harry and Meghan in her final years cannot be overestimated. And according to viewers following his recent interviews, Vickers reinforced parts of that assessment publicly on camera as well. But then came the line that really stopped people cold. Vickers recounts a private remark he attributes directly to Queen Elizabeth herself regarding Prince Harry's role by the later stages of the Sussex saga. According to the book, the late Queen privately described Harry as having effectively become a carer for Archie. Now pause there for a moment, because Vickers is not known for careless language. His reputation rests precisely on caution, restraint, and institutional credibility. He does not write like a gossip columnist, throwing emotional accusations around recklessly. Every attributed quote in a major Hodder biography passes legal review, editorial scrutiny, and reputational consideration before publication, which is why that single sentence has landed with such force inside royal commentary circles. Not because it is dramatic in wording, but because of who supposedly said it and who recorded it. The man who physically helped carry Queen Elizabeth II's coffin into St. George's Chapel has now published what he presents as the late Queen's private assessment of her grandson's reduced role and purpose inside the broader Sussex dynamic. And that quote now exists permanently in a mainstream royal biography, sitting on bookstore shelves across Britain and the Commonwealth. And this is where many long-time royal observers believe something fundamental changed this week. For years, anyone raising questions about the Archie timeline online faced the exact same response. The focus always shifted away from the actual issue itself and toward attacking the messenger. It's just Lady C. It's fringe speculation. No serious royal historian would touch this. But according to many commentators, that defense no longer works the same way after Hugo Vickers' comments. Because importantly, the actual timeline questions themselves have not really changed. Lady Colin Campbell has been repeating largely the same concerns since 2020. No dramatic new leak suddenly appeared this week. No secret document surfaced overnight. What changed was the messenger. Now, the person openly questioning aspects of the story is someone with decades of royal institutional access, a respected publishing house behind him, attendance at major royal ceremonies, and mainstream credibility difficult to dismiss casually, and that does not automatically prove any theory correct. But it does mean the conversation itself has crossed into territory that many people once believed it never would. It began as a question circulating through long-form YouTube commentary, discussed mostly in corners of the internet mainstream royal coverage preferred to ignore. For 6 years, Lady Colin Campbell kept knocking on the same door from Castle Goring in West Sussex, repeating the same argument while critics dismissed her as fringe, controversial, or obsessed. But now, according to many observers, the conversation has crossed into an entirely different tier, because the issue is no longer confined to live streams and online speculation. It now sits inside a hotter hardback biography available in mainstream bookshops across Britain. It exists in a Daily Mail serialization. It exists in a Dan Wooten interview featuring one of the monarchy's most established historians, speaking cautiously but publicly on camera. And that changes the atmosphere around the debate whether people agree with the claims or not. The documentary record itself has not changed. The Buckingham Palace easel from May 6, 2019 still reportedly contains no publicly identified doctor's signature. The amended birth certificate filing from June 2019 still exists on the public record. The Sussex spokesperson's statement from 2021 remains publicly available. And according to critics, no independently named medical witness has ever stepped forward publicly to clarify the timeline questions being discussed. But what changed this week was not the evidence. It was the register of legitimacy surrounding the conversation, because now the same concerns long associated with controversial internet commentary are being echoed, however carefully, by someone deeply embedded within royal institutional history itself. And once a question enters mainstream establishment publishing and respected royal biography circles, many observers believe it becomes much harder to simply dismiss through ridicule alone. That does not automatically prove any allegation correct, but it does mean the conversation has undeniably moved. And according to royal commentators, the next major test may come very soon. Andrew Loney's upcoming paperback release, already being promoted as containing major new material connected to the House of York, is now looming directly behind the Hugo Vickers interview timeline. Many are watching closely to see whether the royal rota engages with these discussions more directly or continues maintaining distance, because sometimes the biggest shift in public narratives does not happen loudly. It happens quietly, step by step, as conversations move from fringe commentary into accepted mainstream debate, before audiences fully realize the center has already shifted underneath them. If you enjoy these deep dives into royal history, institutional narratives, and the slow-moving stories reshaping public perception behind the scenes, make sure to subscribe, because this conversation is clearly not ending anytime soon. So what do you think? Has the establishment finally started catching up to questions that were once dismissed entirely? Or will this moment fade away without changing anything at all?